but it's all good. Well, hey, I really want to dig into your life as a writer and what makes you who you are. So to begin this process, I want to start with the fact that we're coming up on 4 years of this pandemic. How did you get through the pandemic, and how did it change you?
Yeah, so I was supposed to graduate college in 2020, and then I was emailed that everyone had to leave their housing on campus within 10 days. And I went home. And the COVID pandemic really disrupted my life. But also, I think that in retrospect, it allowed me to find more creative freedom than I ever would have found if I was with a group of people who were pressuring me to write certain ideas according to their social mores and everything. So basically, I went home and I couldn't find a job, so I started working in the Amazon warehouse because I needed money,
Yeah.
which was a pretty stark contrast from being at Emory and studying like high literature. I also, at the time, thought that I was going to do a PhD program because I had been really interested and pretty distinguished at, just like in that social circle, like I was really good at reading books in foreign languages. And I think that processing literature is fundamentally a process of connecting emotionally to whoever you're reading about, right? And as you read literature that is farther removed from your social context or your, experiences or whatever your origin, like if I have to connect to Laozi or like a Umayyad poet from the I don't even know from Iraq,
Yeah.
then I have to verge upon how I can actually emotionally connect with what this person is trying to say, and that kind of gave me an opportunity to understand a universal human experience. So at the time, I thought I was going to get a PhD, and then I didn't do very well on my thesis, which is like the main thing that you're supposed to do in order to like launch yourself into PhD programs. So I didn't do that, and then I started working at the Amazon warehouse, and I had like this huge crisis about like who I was going to be and where I was going, and outside of this like super like psycho controlling university environment, I started writing what I actually thought, and I found creative freedom, and that's why I wrote the book that I wrote, Screens and the Ego. And that's also why I launched the magazine that I launched, and now I've been pretty active in the movement to resist echo chambers and allow people to have constructive dialogue with people whom they disagree with. And I've been pretty proud, and I wouldn't say widely praised, but of the people who have read my book, a lot of them received it really well. So that's kind of the story of the pandemic for me.
So if I was to put you in front of a bunch of third graders right now, and it's career day, and one of the kids was curious and said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Yeah, so I have a day job as a writer for a software company. But I also am just a writer, and my process has been trying to figure out how to make money doing it. Um, so, if you can tell a nuanced story about a product, you can make a lot of money writing. But also, if you want to develop a platform, talking about ideas that really matter to you, then you have to connect with the internal lives of your listeners, which is done through authenticity. So that's what I would tell that child. I would say that I'm a writer.
So let's take you back to the third grade. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Um, when I was in third grade, I didn't have a self-conception like that.
Okay.
So I don't know what I don't know what I wanted to be. What did you want to be when you were in third grade? Did
I
you?
watched Chips. I was of that generation, so I wanted to be a part of the California Highway Patrol. I wanted to ride with Poncho. And then, of course, as I got older and saw a more real version in Cops, I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to pass on that. So,
You wanted the adventure, right?
oh yeah, yeah, adrenaline's my go-to.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Where were you born and raised? How did the seeds of getting into writing and storytelling, how did all of this kind of take hold and grow into who you are today?
I'm from Southeast Michigan, and I lived there my whole life. I had cancer as a young child, so a lot of my experiences in early childhood were marked by quarantine before quarantine.
Wow.
Just because yeah, it honestly, having cancer as a child is pretty it's actually pretty nice because you don't have an understanding of your own death, and everyone treats you really nicely. So I think that the greatest shock for me, oh, sorry. So when I had cancer, I was in quarantine in a hospital room. So my grandma like was my main person, and she would sit with me for hours and hours and hours. And my grandma is an Arab American woman, so I internalized a lot of her stories about like faraway places and the way that she reconciled like a culture that she grew up in, and how you transgress like really stringent like how she developed like what it is to be a woman between like the West and the East, and those types of things. So I really connected with her, and that was really important to me. And then I started going to school, and I think that the biggest issue with navigating early childhood cancer is the shock when you get out of the cancer treatment hall. Because that was really insane when I was like, oh, I have to go to school now and I have to like be a normal kid. There's also like there is kind of a mind body disconnect that all kids with early childhood cancer go through, that it comes from the fact that you have to like allow people to like hurt you, like in a very primal sense. You have to be like, okay, like this person's going to take my blood and I just have to stand there and let them take it.
Hmm.
And that mind body disconnect like it's like widely talked about as like a post traumatic stress that's not unlike I don't know. This is going to sound weird, but it's not unlike sexual abuse in the sense that you have like this very a stretched out mind body disconnect
Yeah.
that's lasted into adulthood, just because like to this day like um I can disassociate from my body for long periods of time, and it's like very normal. And of the kids who I know who also went through early childhood illness like that, they also tend to have mind body disconnects, which honestly helped me get into yoga, so that's good. But that's my story from very young.
I've heard that before from sexual abuse survivors that there is that disconnection. There's that kind of, yeah, you're kind of hovering over your reality and dealing with it in the only way that your brain, you're in survival mode. It's interesting.
Right.
My best friend when I was a kid, his name was Matt, and he had like chronic liver problems. And we would
Mm,
go outside and play, and he would come in and he would have an IV that he would hook up. And there was
right.
no remorse. It's like an animal. An animal doesn't have remorse and
Right.
self-neglect whenever there's like a leg missing or whatever. They just go, they just do it. And I remember
Right.
that about him, how there was this just perpetual motion, and it wasn't talked about a lot. It was just a part of his reality, and we didn't get into it a lot. So
Mhm.
it's interesting. And he actually, unfortunately, when I was 17, well, no, how old? I think he was older than me. He passed at 17. So I got an early dose
Mhm.
too of going through that and then seeing, kind of that idea of mortality pretty quick in my life. So,
Right. So
which
did you, when you were a kid and you watched him with the IV, did that like cause you to understand a difference between your reality and his reality?
oh
Like
yeah.
did no.
Yeah, it was, I don't know how stark it was at that point because I was developing and I was just kind of going through my thing with
Hmm.
everything else that was going on. But I remember thinking, wow, this is intense to see this. But I think I was more enamored with the way that he carried on in a regular way
Right.
versus my self-reflection of mortality. So it was interesting. It was a very interesting way of going through life. But
Cool.
so let me ask you this. What was the first story that you wrote where you were like, this is something that works. This is where I want to go?
Um, So the first story that I got published was when I was 17 years old, and it was about having cancer. It was called Why I Hate Bananas, and it was published in Universal Table's Wising Up Press. And it was a pretty like humorous story about like uh, taking chemotherapy and then feeling nausea afterwards. But It recounted my experience watching a girl who I knew die, and it kind of took you through the levels of like psychological and social disconnect that you have when you experience early childhood cancer. And obviously, that was going to be the first thing that I ever published because that's like a primal experience. And also having cancer from ages 3 to like 7, um, like those like sacred early childhood memories where like you're like a completely like in love with yourself and the world, you know, like those really early childhood memories where you feel safe and nothing bad has happened yet. Those occurred in a hospital room. Like so like I don't associate cancer with purely negative emotions. So it kind of talked about that. Then as I went through college, I got published in 2017 Tulip Tree Press's Stories That Need to Be Told anthology. And that one was about a fictionalized version of my uncle who adopted his granddaughter. He was a Vietnam veteran, and the process of like adopting his granddaughter was like really life-giving for him in terms of like trauma recovery. And then I went on to continue to publish after that.
Yeah, I've been in that row before. I just recently had one of the coolest things happen with something published. I published a poem
Good
about
job.
yeah, and I've been doing that for years, but I this one specifically was about a lead singer of a band called the Heart Sardines out of New York City. And they're kind
Mhm,
of like they're a throwback to like the 20s and getting people dancing, and it's a good feeling music. And her name
mhm,
is Miss Elizabeth, and I wrote a poem about her, and I actually got to MC an event where they were going to open up at a theater here in Kansas City. And I said, hey, I wrote a poem, what do you think? And I just figured it would be okay, cool. But she grabbed it and was like, can I have this? And actually started getting really emotional reading it. Was like, oh my God. And so it was cool. It's cool when you can like there's something special about that when you can see something in print after all of the sweat and tears and everything we go through to see it come to fruition. It's fun for sure.
mhm,
um so who's
definitely.
been a hero for you in your life?
My grandmother. My grandmother's been a hero for me because she taught me how to emotionally process things, and how to like order your internal life so that you can like have emotional resilience and so forth.
So if you could meet a writer or anybody that you find inspirational right now that's alive on the planet, who would it be? Who'd you love to, who'd be fascinating for you to meet?
Oh, my two favorite writers are Ernest Hemingway and Milan Kundera,
Okay.
who are both rather different writers. So for Ernest Hemingway, uh, okay, so Ernest Hemingway is important because he actually was able to capture the essence of World War One like no other writer. Um, it's difficult to describe how terrible World War One was for so many people, right? Like it so before World War One, when you went to war, there was a bravery aspect where like you were going to stand in battle and you were going to fight, and the you know the strength of your body had something to do with whether or not you were going to win the fight. But by the time uh, like explosives got to the size that they were in World War One, your physical strength had nothing to do with your experience at war. And a lot of people tried to describe the horrors of World War One by uh, minutely like describing the details of like what they saw. And Ernest Hemingway's interpretation actually has very little details about war, but it captures the emotional experience of it. So it starts with it's called A Farewell to Arms, and it starts
Yes.
with like this boy who's going to go to war, and he's like very young, and he's kind of excited to do what he's supposed to do. And then at the very beginning of the book, he's eating macaroni with his fingers. And like this is like dry pasta with a slab of cheese on top because that's how they used to eat it. And then he gets blown up. And that moment is like completely unheroic. There's nothing brave about that. There's nothing redeeming about that experience. It's just a terrible experience. And then about 3/5 of the book is this boy in recovery, like courting a nurse, and they have like a very childish like high schooly relationship where there's like this one really mean nun, and they keep like trying to sneak around her and sneak alcohol and like kiss behind like a door or something. And then And then he gets to the end, and the woman gets pregnant. And they're going to run away to Switzerland together, and they get away, and they're super happy, and their baby's coming, and then she dies, and the baby dies, and he's the man Henry is like they're dead, they're just dead, and there's nothing because they're just dead, and there was no point of it, and no one's going to remember that I love them, and no one's going to ever experience my pain, and I just have to go home now. And that is essentially the experience of World War One,
Yeah.
where it's like there was nothing. I had the most terrible experience in the world, and it didn't matter to anyone, and I have to go home now. And like millions of young men saw their pain on his pages, and since then Ernest Hemingway has been revered. And so I've read almost everything Ernest Hemingway has written, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate him. And then Milan Kundera, but I don't want to take up too much time. Do you have a
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. No, no, no. I was just going to say, I just read a book by Malcolm Gladwell called The Bomber Mafia. And it
Oh, I
talked
love
about
that stuff.
how the trauma of all the ground troops and bloodshed in World War One propelled them to go to an air war. The Air Force came out of that. And it was more
Mhm.
tactical, like you said. It was more mental. It was about, you know, hitting a small barrel from 30,000 feet in the sky, that idea, so that they wouldn't have to sacrifice so many lives at that point. But yeah, the whole idea of
Yep,
war, and Hemingway was a master at the psychology of all of that.
right.
So you also are very good at getting into the minds of your characters and putting that on a page. What's your motivation every day to do what you do, to write and to make stories? What ultimately gets you out of bed every day?
I think that uh well, there's a couple ideas in there. First of all, the reason that I get out of bed every day as opposed to just like giving up on life is because um I believe that the culmination of that my life doesn't really belong to me, because thousands of my ancestors like lived and died so that I could be here, and I owe it to the people before me to live a good life and to pass that on, right? So I kind of reject this like hyper Freudian idea of like individuality where I get to control my own life, because I really do owe it to like the people around me to like keep it together and live a good life. So that's the reason that I get up every day. And then the reason that I write is because I wouldn't be able to understand my world if I didn't try to create a story out of it.
Yeah.
And that's I'm constantly creating stories. And as I meet people and see like what they're going through, I just I see the through line, or I try to see the through line about how it begins and how it ends.
So of all the things that you've done so far, what are you the proudest of?
I'm proudest of writing my book. And the reason that I'm proud of writing my book is because I wrote what I thought was true, and I wrote what I thought was true despite the fact that some people might not like it, or despite the fact that it's uh, not necessarily going to, propel my career or get me in with the right people or whatever. I just wrote what I thought was true. And I respect the choice to live an authentic life.
So what's your expectation to go to New York? How excited are you?
Oh, I am very excited to go to New York. It's like the right place for a writer, and
Yeah.
I'm definitely excited to have that experience. But I don't have a lot of things to say about New York at this time because I haven't been there yet.
Yeah. Right, absolutely.
Right.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, all of the fans, everyone that reads you. But
Mhm.
ultimately you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Yeah. So I think that human beings have a limitless impulse to self-define, and I'm no exception to that. But I can tell you how I learned to respect myself. So Screens and the Ego talks extensively about like how I dealt with like cycles of like feeling really good about myself and then crashing and feeling really bad about myself. And I call these like cycles of self-loathing. And I think that like uh, the vast majority of people my age are going through this, because I don't think that um, having a empowerment psychology or self-esteem really helps people fundamentally respect themselves as a person. I think that uh, religion is a better way of framing the idea of like how to respect yourself, in the sense that like if you can respect yourself like you would respect another person, then you don't have to like convince yourself that you're a good person, because you already know that you are. And the fundamental way to respect yourself is by behaving in a way that's respectable, and doing things that are respectable day to day. So I feel best about myself when I like, call my great aunt, or hold the door for someone, whatever it is. If I can like make another person feel good about themselves, if I can like do a good job at work, send a really nice email, talk someone down from a conflict, whatever it is, if I can be a force for good in the world, then I can respect myself like I would another person, and develop a sense of self-esteem.
So if anyone wants to get your book, they want to read anything more that you put out there, anything about your world, reach out. How can they do that?
They can visit my website, JaneMarieAuret.com. I am accepting open submissions, so if you're interested in commenting on the psychological condition of modern society, or you just have an interesting piece that you're really proud of, submit it to me. And I've been putting up a lot of really awesome pieces lately, so definitely get in contact. I'd love to talk.
Excellent. Jane-Marie, thank you so much. Thanks for your story. Have
Thanks
a
so
great
much.
move to New York. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Joe. Talk to you
Thank you.
later.
Take care. See ya.